There was a time when I believed that thinking more meant understanding more. I used to analyze every word, every choice, every silence, as if life were a puzzle waiting for me to solve it. I would lie awake at night replaying conversations, imagining different outcomes, searching for hidden meanings in things that were already gone. My mind never stopped. It was like a machine that couldn't rest, a fire that didn't know when to burn out. But what I didn't realize then was that the mind is not always a servant. Sometimes it becomes the master. And when the mind rules, peace becomes impossible. Every thought leads to another, and then another, until you are no longer thinking, you are drowning. You start living not in the world, but in the echo of your own interpretations of it. That is what overthinking truly is, a mind that has mistaken movement for meaning. I used to believe that if I could just think enough, I could control life. I thought if I understood everything, nothing could hurt me. But the truth is, thinking too much was how I avoided feeling. It was my armor against uncertainty, my escape from surrender. Because to stop overthinking is to face what thought is trying to cover: fear. When you are asleep spiritually, you think the mind is who you are. You mistake its voice for your own. Every story it tells feels real, every doubt feels urgent, every judgment feels justified. You live inside its commentary like a fish inside a bowl, never realizing that the water is not the ocean. You confuse analysis with awareness, and logic with wisdom. And yet, the more you think, the smaller your world becomes. Because thought is always about what was or what might be, never what is. Overthinking pulls you into time, awareness returns you to now. It took me years to see that I wasn't thinking, I was reacting. Each thought was a mirror of fear, a reflex born of insecurity. You see, overthinking is not intelligence. It's the anxiety of control. It's the mind trying to play God because the heart no longer trusts life. And the tragedy is that no amount of thought can give you what only silence can reveal. The more I thought, the more I suffered. Because thought feeds on separation, it needs an enemy, a problem, something to fix. Without something to fix, the mind feels useless. It's addicted to noise, to motion, to solving what doesn't need solving. I began to see how people live like that every day, replaying the past, planning the future, never arriving. They think they are living, but they are only narrating their lives from inside the cage of commentary. And then they wonder why peace never stays. When I started awakening, everything began to shift. I realized that silence is not the absence of thought, it's the presence of awareness. That was the first crack in the wall. Because once you see that you are not your mind, something changes forever. You begin to watch your thoughts the way you would watch clouds pass across the sky, there, but not you. You start noticing that your mind talks even when there's nothing to say. It invents problems, questions, fears, and futures, all to keep itself alive. The mind loves to chase closure. It wants to understand everything because understanding feels like control. But life doesn't exist to be controlled. It exists to be lived. And that is something the overthinking mind will never understand, because it cannot live, it can only comment. When I was trapped in that cycle, I thought peace would come after I figured things out. But the paradox is, peace comes when you stop trying to figure it all out. When you stop demanding answers, life begins to reveal truth on its own. Overthinking is the ego's way of saying, I don't trust the universe, I'll handle it myself. But the spiritually awake knows something deeper, that what's meant for you doesn't need to be forced, and what's real doesn't need to be analyzed. That's why awakening is not about gaining new thoughts, it's about losing the old obsession with them. It's realizing that thinking is a tool, not a home. You pick it up when needed, and you put it down when you're done. You don't live inside it anymore. When you awaken, you start to see how thought is always one step behind reality. By the time your mind describes what's happening, it's already gone. So the awakened stop chasing understanding, and start living in presence. Because in presence, life explains itself. And yet, even knowing this doesn't happen overnight. The mind doesn't give up easily. It will try to use spirituality as another thing to overthink, analyzing peace, dissecting enlightenment, chasing stillness like another goal. That's the trap. The mind can even turn letting go into something to do. The real awakening begins when you start to smile at your own mind. When you stop arguing with it and simply watch it move, like waves breaking on the shore, endless, harmless, beautiful in their impermanence. That's when you begin to live again. Because you finally see that the silence you were chasing was never missing. It was just buried beneath the noise of trying to understand. The moment you start waking up, something subtle begins to happen inside you. It's not dramatic, and it's not loud. It's like a soft light turning on in a room you didn't know you were sitting in. You start noticing the noise of your own thoughts, the constant stream of analysis, fear, and commentary that you used to call me. And instead of diving into it, you begin to watch it. For the first time, you realize that there's a difference between the voice in your head and the awareness that hears it. That realization changes everything. Because before awakening, thought was the master. It decided what you felt, who you were, what was real, and what was possible. But now, that power begins to dissolve. You see that you can observe a thought without believing it, and that you can let it pass without needing to fix it. And the more you watch, the more transparent the mind becomes. At first, this awareness can feel unsettling. You might even feel lost. After all, if you are not your thoughts, then who are you? The world taught you to define yourself through thinking, your opinions, your memories, your goals, your labels. When those start to lose their grip, the ego begins to panic. It whispers, "Without me, you'll be nothing." But that's the lie that awakening destroys. Because the truth is, when the mind quiets, you discover the vastness that has always been there, the space in which thought arises and dissolves. It's strange how, once you become aware, you start seeing how much the world runs on overthinking. People debate endlessly, plan obsessively, worry constantly, as if thinking harder could stop life from being unpredictable. But awakening reveals a shocking simplicity. You don't need to control everything to be safe. You don't need to know what happens next to trust where you are. The need to understand was never peace, it was fear pretending to be wisdom. I remember when I began noticing my thoughts like passing cars on a road. Before, I was standing in traffic, trying to stop every car, trying to fix every broken engine. Now, I sit on the hill and simply watch them go by. They appear, they pass, they disappear. No judgment, no struggle, no need to control the flow. And the more I watched, the clearer the road became. Because when you stop standing in the middle of your thoughts, you stop being hit by them. That's when a new kind of intelligence appears, not from thinking, but from awareness. This intelligence doesn't plan, it perceives. It doesn't analyze, it understands. It's quiet, yet powerful, because it's connected to something larger than the individual mind. When you are spiritually awake, you begin to feel guided by something deeper than logic, an intuition that flows naturally from silence. You stop needing to figure everything out, and instead, you begin to sense what feels right. Life starts moving through you, instead of you trying to move through life. At first, it feels strange to trust that flow. The mind will still resist. It will say, "You're being careless, you're not thinking enough, you'll lose control." But soon you see that control was the very thing that kept you tense. The more you tried to control life, the more it slipped through your fingers. And the moment you stop clutching it, things begin to align on their own. That's the mystery the awakened understand, that life doesn't need your interference, it only needs your awareness. When you live in awareness, you realize that thinking still happens, but it no longer owns you. It's like background music. You can hear it, but you don't dance to every note. You can use thought when it's useful, and put it down when it's not. This is where true clarity begins. Because clarity doesn't come from thinking more, it comes from thinking less, from letting the noise settle until what's true can rise to the surface. There's a kind of grace that appears when the mind stops fighting itself. You begin to notice the small things again, the sound of your own breathing, the light shifting through a window, the feeling of being fully present in this exact moment. Nothing has changed on the outside, yet everything feels different. You start to understand what peace really means, not the absence of problems, but the absence of unnecessary thought. As you awaken, the relationship between you and your thoughts transforms completely. You no longer see them as enemies to be silenced, or as facts to be obeyed. You see them as clouds passing through the vast sky of awareness. They can come and go freely, and you remain untouched. That's what freedom feels like, not the disappearance of the mind, but the end of identification with it. And yet, this freedom doesn't make you passive or detached from life. Quite the opposite. When you're no longer tangled in your own overthinking, you start to experience life directly. Colors seem brighter, sounds feel deeper, moments last longer. Because you're not living through a mental filter anymore, you're living through presence. When I used to overthink, every situation was a problem waiting to be solved. Every silence felt uncomfortable, every unknown felt dangerous. But when awareness takes over, you begin to see the beauty in uncertainty. You start to understand that not knowing is not ignorance, it's openness. It's the mind's surrender to the infinite. That's when something extraordinary happens. Joy begins to arise from the simplest things. Because the overthinking mind can't see beauty, it only sees function and purpose. But awareness sees the sacred in everything. It finds wonder in a single breath, in the sound of wind through the trees, in the rhythm of existence itself. It's not that life becomes easier, it's that you stop creating unnecessary suffering through your own thoughts. There's a story I once heard about a monk who spent years meditating in silence. When asked what he learned, he said, "The world is noisy, but the soul is not." That line stayed with me, because it captured something essential. Awakening doesn't erase the noise outside, it simply stops it from echoing inside. And that's the real freedom, the ability to let the world move, while you remain still within. Eventually, you start to laugh at your own mind. Not in mockery, but in compassion. You see how hard it tries, how desperately it wants to protect you, even when it causes pain. You realize that overthinking was never your enemy, it was your mind's way of trying to help. It was doing its best with limited understanding. And when you see that, you stop fighting it. You start guiding it gently back toward silence, the way you'd calm a frightened child. Awakening doesn't mean the end of thought, it means the beginning of wisdom. It means that you no longer need to think your way to peace, because peace is what you are when thinking stops. That's the quiet revolution, the shift from doing to being, from analyzing to witnessing. And once that shift happens, you can never go back completely. The mind may still speak, but it no longer has the final word. As awareness deepens, you begin to realize how unnecessary most thoughts are. How much of what you used to worry about never actually mattered. You start deleting entire categories of mental noise, the endless self-criticism, the comparisons, the hypothetical futures. You no longer need them. Because when you live in presence, clarity comes naturally. You begin to trust silence more than analysis, feeling more than argument, intuition more than reason. And somehow, life works better that way. That's why the spiritually awake don't overthink anymore, not because they're smarter, but because they finally understand the difference between noise and knowing. Thinking used to be their world, now it's just one of the many waves passing through the ocean of awareness. And with that realization, a new kind of peace begins, not an escape from life, but an intimacy with it that overthinking could never offer. When the mind finally quiets, life starts to speak in a different language. It's not a language of words or logic, but one of rhythm, intuition, and flow. You begin to move without overthinking why. You speak from presence instead of planning what to say. You act because something deep within you moves, not because the mind has convinced you to. And for the first time, you realize that this is what freedom truly feels like. The spiritually awake don't overthink, not because they have mastered the mind, but because they no longer worship it. They've stopped treating thought as the ultimate authority. They see it as one instrument among many, something to use with awareness, not something to obey blindly. They understand that the mind is a beautiful servant, but a terrible master. When you reach this space, life becomes quieter inside, even when the world around you is loud. You stop living as a reaction to your thoughts, and start living as a response to the moment. You no longer chase answers, because you've realized that peace isn't found in explanations, but in acceptance. There's a kind of relief that comes with this, the relief of not needing to solve everything, not needing to fix yourself, not needing to understand why you feel what you feel. You simply allow it. And in that allowing, understanding arrives on its own, naturally, without effort. When you no longer overthink, you begin to trust. You trust that life has its own intelligence. You start noticing how everything happens at its own perfect pace. You see that every delay, every silence, every detour, was part of something bigger than your plans. And so, you stop forcing. You stop controlling. You stop arguing with reality. There's something incredibly peaceful about not needing to know. Because the mind's addiction to control is rooted in fear, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of loss, the fear of not being enough. When awareness awakens, those fears begin to dissolve, not because you've solved them, but because you've seen through them. You realize that fear only survives when you believe the thoughts that feed it. Without belief, thoughts lose their power. They still appear, but they pass through you like wind through open hands. Overthinking was always an attempt to escape the present moment. It was a way to avoid surrender. But once you awaken, you see that surrender is not weakness, it's strength. It's the courage to trust what you cannot control. It's the wisdom to see that life doesn't need to be managed, it just needs to be experienced. In this space of awareness, action still happens, decisions are still made, emotions still come and go, but they no longer own you. You respond instead of reacting. You choose presence over panic. And slowly, your life begins to align in ways it never could when you were overthinking every step. There's a kind of effortless intelligence that emerges when you stop trying to control your thoughts. It's as if life itself begins to think through you. Ideas arise exactly when they're needed. Words come at the right time, solutions appear at the perfect moment. It's not luck, it's alignment. When you're no longer fighting your own mind, you become available to something larger than it. You begin to see how much energy overthinking used to steal from you. All the time you spent analyzing, worrying, and predicting, gone in smoke. Now, that same energy returns to you. It becomes creativity, intuition, presence. It becomes joy. Because joy isn't something you create through thinking, it's what naturally shines when thinking quiets. The awakened don't live without thought, but with awareness of thought. They can watch a worry rise and say, there's the mind again, and smile. They can feel uncertainty and still choose peace. They can make choices without demanding that every choice be perfect. Because perfection was always the mind's fantasy, not life's truth. When you stop overthinking, you stop living through fear's imagination. You stop rehearsing pain before it happens. You stop carrying the weight of problems that don't even exist yet. You begin to live moment by moment, breath by breath. And you realize that this simplicity, is what you were searching for all along. You see, thought always wants to make life complicated, but awareness brings you back to the obvious, that peace was never lost, it was just buried under noise. That love was never gone, it was just hidden beneath judgment. That truth was never far away, it was simply drowned by questions. When the noise fades, what remains isn't emptiness, it's fullness. The fullness of simply being here. There's a quiet revolution in living this way. It's not flashy, it's not dramatic, but it changes everything. You begin to walk slower, breathe deeper, listen longer. You stop rushing through life, because you're no longer trying to arrive anywhere. The destination was never the goal, awareness was. And now, every moment becomes sacred. Every simple thing, the light on a wall, the sound of rain, the breath moving in your chest, becomes holy again. When I stopped overthinking, I started hearing life's small whispers again. The laughter in silence, the wisdom in stillness, the calm presence that was always waiting for me. It's almost funny, I used to think peace was something I had to achieve, when it was simply something I had to stop interrupting. Now, when thoughts come, I let them. When emotions rise, I feel them. When silence calls, I answer. There's no resistance anymore. That's the beauty of awakening, nothing needs to be fought, because nothing is against you. Even your mind was never the enemy. It was just a messenger misunderstood. It was trying to protect you from what it couldn't comprehend. But once you awaken, protection turns into trust. You begin to notice that the less you overthink, the more alive you feel. Because thinking keeps you in your head, but life happens in your body, in your breath, in your senses, in the raw immediacy of experience. Overthinking disconnects you from what's real. Awareness reconnects you. And in that reconnection, love returns. You start to understand people differently. You listen without judgment, because you no longer need to categorize everything. You speak without rehearsing, because truth flows naturally when the mind is quiet. You forgive easily, because you see that most pain comes from confusion, not evil. And most of all, you stop being at war with yourself. This doesn't mean that life becomes perfect. Challenges still come. Pain still visits. But now, you meet them with presence instead of panic. You meet them with awareness instead of resistance. You see that even difficulty has its own intelligence. It shapes you, teaches you, expands you. Nothing is wasted anymore. That's what living without overthinking feels like, not the end of problems, but the end of unnecessary suffering. You learn to trust the flow of life, even when you don't understand it. You learn to breathe through uncertainty, to rest in the unknown. You discover that peace was never about controlling life, it was about allowing it to unfold. And so, the spiritually awake walk differently in this world. They move with softness, they speak with presence, and they think only when thinking is needed. They don't waste energy analyzing love, they live it. They don't debate the meaning of peace, they embody it. Their mind is still there, but it no longer rules them, it serves them. It becomes a quiet companion instead of a noisy dictator. In that quiet companionship, you finally feel whole. You see that life was never asking you to think more, it was asking you to feel more, to see more, to be here fully. And that's the ultimate paradox. Once you stop overthinking, you start understanding everything, not through thought, but through awareness itself.